Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to Coder Radio. Today is a little bit of a different format. We have Adam Dimitruk again of AdaptTech and, of course, event modeling and event sourcing fame. But it's actually your questions. That's right. After his last interview, some of you sent in a lot of really good questions. I have, like the gin distillery I am, distilled them down into 4 questions that are basically broad. It's kind of 5 because one is like 2 parts, but we won't tell him that. He agreed to 4. These are your questions on event sourcing and event modeling. I would suggest, if you haven't listened to the previous episode, go ahead. It's in the back catalog. You can search by his name, or I will put a link in the show notes. That's fine. Really good. We get a little deeper into, how to do event modeling, what it's for, what the difference between event modeling and event sourcing is. That was actually our number 1 question. And what the relationship between them to Agile is, and a couple other things. So really good listen. A little longer than usual, very dense, a lot of information here, but I know there's a whole bunch of you that sent me feedback that you were very interested in this topic. And, frankly, so am I, because it's the hardest part. And Adam and I get into this in the interview towards the end. The hardest part is really breaking down, let's call them vague, because that's what they are, customer or client requirements into developable chunks or slices, as he calls them. So yeah, there's a lot here. Little housekeeping. The Discord, lots of jobs being posted there. Thank you guys for that. I know people are looking for work, so always keep an eye on that. I am actually advertising on my own show. How crazy. So we are doing until the end of October a promotion for Alice. If you're a Coder Radio listener and you just kind of mention that in an email to me, there's not like a fancy page for it. We are doing a free initial assessment and attempt at parsing your data out of whatever old data source you have into either something that Power BI can use, right? So we'll do it as a demo. So it'll probably be like, I don't know, we'll figure it out. It's going to depend on where your data is coming from, right? Or something that Snowflake can use. Now, if you're not familiar with Snowflake, they are a large data warehouse. They advertise a lot about AI company that a lot of the fancy enterprises are using these days. So let me know, and we can start from there. Yeah, it's kind of a no-risk thing to you, right? We try it out. We see what we can get it into. I have a guess that of this audience, more of you are interested in the Power BI side of things, or at least more of your employers would be. But curious to hear from you guys who are using Snowflake. It's they've impressed me quite a lot. I'm just I'm trying to get a handle on who is like the ideal Snowflake customer. Not for me necessarily, but like of Snowflake, right? Who is the ideal customer for Snowflake? Because their tool is it's got all the bells and whistles as far as these data warehouse tools. If you're familiar, it's kind of like a Databricks. So it's something to keep in mind. That's about it. I'm not going to hold you any longer. Enjoy the interview with Adam. Again, check out that Discord. Bye-bye. Hello, with me again is Adam Dimitruk of AdaptTech, and more famously, perhaps, the guru-in-chief of event sourcing and event modeling. Kind of, if you're on LinkedIn and you want to know about event sourcing, he's your man. How are you, Adam?
Good. What a lovely intro. Thank you for that. Hopefully I can live up to the hype. Always good to chat with you.
The coders have questions for you.
Awesome.
Today we're doing things a little different, folks. These are just user-generated, i.e. you, right, listener-generated questions that I have distilled down into their basic forms, because a lot of them are, sort of the same question, just like different variants.
Yeah.
And Adam, are you ready for the Inquisition?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I do it professionally every day, so let's do it.
Number 1, and this is probably my fault from the last interview. What is the difference between event sourcing and event modeling?
Oh, that's an easy one. So event sourcing is just the strategy of storing state as a history of information that was ingested by the system. In other words, as opposed to CRUD, where you're updating records, you're record keeping. In other words, you're not destroying any information. When your user profile is updated, you're storing another record. You're not updating the record of your profile, and that's it. Event modeling, on the other hand, is the notation and also the methodology of making a diagram of what your system does in a way that is understood by everyone, not just developers. So this is a great bridge between developer and the business, the guys asking for what they want. So what makes it possible for both to communicate? Sometimes you remember old notations like UML. They were highly technical and they had 7 different diagrams. Well, that was a little too complex and it went a little bit too low level, like what do the classes do and things like that. The sweet spot is somewhere in between, and that's elaborating on what state the system is in. And the commonality between the two is the word event. This is the facts on a timeline, as you inferred by the first part of this question, maybe, that as the system is used, you are storing more and more information, and these appear as events on a timeline. And so that's a great place for both to agree, because technical and non-technical people can communicate via, hey, did we actually store this information at this point in time? Yes. So really the difference between the two is that event modeling is a notation and a method for talking and describing systems that you're building or maintaining. And from that point of view, it's really nothing to do with implementation. However, event sourcing is entirely to do with strategy and the implementation of how you store states. So as opposed to your traditional Ruby on Rails or any other kind of system where you just have a set of tables, kind of a schema, a global schema for how the application works, instead of that, you have just the things that happen, the events on a timeline. A key difference there is that, again, is more about the definition of what event sourcing is and its implication. Because you're not, let's say, updating a user table when someone updates their profile or signs up, or inserting into that when they sign up and updating it if they change their profile. If it's left as a ledger, you then have to make projections to have the equivalent of a user table. And the beautiful thing about that is that for any point in time on your timeline, different workflows that you're supporting that may need user information, each part of that system then can make its own projection with and without the data that it needs. And what event sourcing allows then is the idea that you have to have multiple models, not just this one model of how does the user table fit in with everything else. Each part of the system makes its own decision how it's going to interpret the facts of the past. And so this really reins in the devil that we all deal with, no matter if we're programmers or whatever. As systems grow, the traditional coupling really does bite us. And that's why we have these expensive features later on, and the complexity goes through the roof. And, putting in features a few months later is like pulling teeth. Well, if you're supporting multiple models, that doesn't happen, at least not as fast, significantly not as fast. And so we've been working on systems that grew to be quite large, or already large systems where we can continue to deliver features at a steady, even pace as before. And there's many other benefits, of course. So yeah, in short, let's just answer the question so we can get into some other chats. The difference between event sourcing and event modeling is really, one's a notation and a methodology, event modeling, and event sourcing is really the implementation side, the attitude that you're going to not erase data, and you're going to put down data on a ledger, and you're going to make use of projections of what's on there to have a stand-in for your user table, for example. Does that make sense?
That makes sense. Yeah. I mean, I think, just to give kind of an illustration, right? A simple case would be, let's say you have a employees table, and you have a lady who's part of that table, right? Is a record in that table. She gets married, wants to change her name. Instead of just like we would in the kind of more traditional Rails, where just like update her last name, right, to whatever the new last name is, you would create an event for that. Is that fair?
Fair enough. And actually, one of the key important points there is that usually you, in event sourcing, depending on your system, especially let's just say this is something at City Hall where you want to track certain important things like someone getting married, you simply wouldn't have last name changed event. You would have, lady got married event.
Got it.
And then there you would then glean a little bit more. So it's like logging on steroids. It's really, this ledger is really telling you more about that, because you could have an event called typo fixed on sign up or entry, ledger entry or something. And, both could have the same type of information. And the interesting thing about this is that you're filtering on, even if you have the same fields, you're filtering on what the name of the event is. And that's quite powerful, because that allows you to express in the event model, business core ideas. And in the system for a City Hall where you're changing your last name, maybe you gave me employee, but I'm changing your example here on purpose. But if this was at the City Hall, you would have, maybe an employer also would care, but City Hall would definitely,
care
know that this is, maybe it's part of a totally different event called a marriage certificate issued or something like that. And then that would also be a valid event that would affect the, citizens table, if you will, or a citizens projection in this case, because now, even though you may have these projections as materialized views as tables, we usually just refer to them projections, because the table is really, something that you can or don't need to have. I'm writing some systems that allow you to do, smart indexing on these events. And there's never a need for making a table called employees or citizens. There's simply a projection which just relies on those events. And you start optimizing when, looking and indexing those things gets a little bit, on the optimization side, it starts to become less performant. And so you may want to have this materialized view, which would have a name such as, employee profiles or something, which you may use in one part of your workflow. But you may use a different projection that also has to infer the last name in another part of your system, and that's fine. So one of the tricky things about event sourcing and event modeling is that you kind of want to throw away the dry rule, the don't repeat yourself. You actually want to repeat yourself, because that reins in the coupling side. If I was to have a user table or employee table or a citizen table, one of these tables, and I have a bunch of workflows that use that table, I've now coupled those workflows. And let's say it was Joe's working on one, I'm working on the other, and you're working on the third. If we make some changes to our logic, all of a sudden we're stepping in each other's toes. Now, if we rely on these facts on the ledger and we have each of us has an almost identical projection for what we're doing, then, and you need to change something or I need to change something, I don't have to go to the other person and say that, hey, I'm changing this table. Watch out, your stuff may break. So, yeah.
All right. So, second question. I think I hope I know the answer to this one. And I will tell you, I get the sense that the folks who wrote in about this topic are quite frustrated with their scrum leaders and stand-ups. So there's two forms of the question. I'm going to give you both and you can answer either one.
Sure.
What is the relationship to Agile/XP? The second form of that question is, can this get me out of my annoying stand-up that lasts 40 minutes? Now, there were some variations on the amount of time. Some said a half hour, some said 40 minutes.
Yeah.
Guys, anybody doing stand-ups that are super long?
It's definitely a problem, and that's kind of a symptom of other dysfunctions. I don't want to blame Agile itself for anything, but it's certain. I've been there at different companies back in my consulting days where, yeah, you've these stand-ups really do warp into some sort of justify my employment here. So I'll filibuster for a while about how awesome I am, instead of giving the 2-minute limit of what I've done, what I'm going to do, and if I have any blockers, right? How does that inflate into an hour?
My favorite stand-up, I guess you call it anti-pattern, is the person who's just super behind will kind of take forever explaining just how difficult and complicated their ticket or their task was to ensure the PM that there's really a good reason for them to be behind. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So these are really not stand-ups as they were meant to be. They're more like status, and then
Yeah.
also, status updates that don't have a limit on that. So we're actually in 2 days we'll be celebrating our 10-year anniversary as a company.
Nice.
Yeah, so that's pretty good for someone that chose the harder path to walk that we're still alive. And yeah, I mean, we don't do them. One of the ways of, to get out of this is to have the event model in front of you, because if you're working through event modeling and event sourcing, you're focused on one of the vertical slices that you're working on. You kind of heard about, slice architecture from here and there. More generally applied, it's like, well, whatever feature you're working on, you're including the database, your business layer logic, your UI. It's kind of all one cross section of the system, if you will, that you're totally in control of to get that feature working. It becomes very much more defined in event sourcing and event modeling, because you're only looking at one state transition, like new information being added, or you're talking about one of those projections we mentioned earlier, and also there, which UI it affects, and any kind of business rules and invariants you're implementing, and then the shape of the data, the event that you're writing, or how you're interpreting the past events for your projection, if that's the type of slice you're doing. So, but now bring this. How does this affect your stand-ups? Well, your stand-ups are kind of not necessary, because what are the stand-ups there for? They're an information radiator to the PM and others to show everyone where you're at, and like where the project's at, and if there's any stumbling things. So just looking at the event model, we color in the parts that each person is working on and hasn't done. So they're usually yellow, and then people have their names beside them, and then the ones that are finished are green backgrounds. These are rectangles that are background colored in different status. So yellow in progress, green done, and then just blank or no background is the stuff that's left to do. So it's very easy to see how far the project is, who's working on what, and anytime anyone goes to the event model, because that's what we use to communicate. Like, we don't have Jira tickets and all that kind of stuff. We just look at the event model. You can have a blank rectangle with your name on it to kind of mark the next one you want to do, so, but we limit that to like one or two, of course. And that ends up being a really good replacement. So in short, yes, you can replace your stand-ups by using event modeling. The key to being successful at event modeling, as with any practice, is that you need to have buy-in and you need to use it. I don't like using event modeling as yet another tool in your tool belt, and it's going to be one of the 10 things you're doing. It's like, if you're going to make it effective, you got to make sure that it is the place where the collaboration happens and the communication exchange happens. And that's where we see huge success, because you now have a living document that doesn't die like a wiki page or set of wiki pages. You now have something that's actually used to move the software forward, to move your system forward. If someone needs a new feature, it has to be on the event model first. So that way you force the documentation to continue to live with that. And this is kind of a anti-clean code, readable code slant as well, because unfortunately, while readable code is great, it only helps the developers, doesn't help the rest of the company, right? So if you have up-to-date event model, it helps both. It really documents how the system works without looking at the model itself, but it also helps everyone that is contributing, such as product owners and directors and CEOs and whoever else that wants to guide the project and understand, what it will do and what it is doing, or what fixes are being worked on. That's all right there. It's that it is the radiation of the information right there. That's how I would say it replaces parts of the agile process, which I don't think may work in a lot of places. And I also have this, complaint myself, and I've seen the complaints from others that these, stand-ups are horribly abused, and people, fight about their validity online, that like, you're just doing it wrong. You're holding it wrong. You should be doing your, of course,
hire our agile consulting firm. We'll set you straight.
Yes, exactly. They're very, lots of places went down that direction. I have a controversial sort of slide from one of my presentations I did I think in Brisbane a couple of years ago, which is like, the drastic things that we did to become experts at event modeling. And it's how we dropped all the things like test-driven development and domain-driven design, and still attained the same goals without doing any of the practices themselves. So it is really about, having those clearly defined pieces of work. And the biggest thing about the event model, and why the last reason why it really helps the status, is that we've been working on fixed costs as an agreement between the clients and ourselves and our subcontractors and ourselves, in that on average, there is an average cost to the effort of making one of these state transitions or one of these state projection views. So essentially, the more difficult slices that you'll do at the beginning of the project, they might be more expensive, but then, in true agile fashion, you're getting the high value, high risk things, done first. So you can kind of de-risk the project as soon as possible. Usually that's the case. And so what you're left with is the dumb stuff like a sign up page, etc., at the end. And it's like having dessert after. Those slices are easy as pie, and it's kind of a reward for everyone. So instead of a death march, you kind of get the opposite. And the cost curve per sort of slice is kind of a linear downsloping line, that the first slices are more difficult, not because you're doing infrastructure and doing setup and bootstrap, but because you may have more invariance and more business rules in those slices than the others. If you ever get to something that's getting, too many specifications, too many given when-thens for a slice, you usually want to break that up into multiple steps, which can be shown as automation behind the scenes. And that way you can kind of use the event model to be the bartering between business and tech. Instead of talking about t-shirt sizing, we're getting a little bit on the sidetrack here, but essentially the why the slices work as a measure of progress and all of that is because they're generally very uniform in terms of effort. So that's where you get the assurance that you're making the progress you're saying you're making by watching, more and more of these slices get filled in green, day to day, week to week. And it's very satisfying to see your plan being colored in, and you can see the light at the end of the tunnel, and it's not a train.
And it's not. That's the last part is very important.
Yeah.
That it not be a train. All right. So this is the last question. Now, I am not sure how I would approach this. So I'm going to ask you the question, obviously.
Sure.
But then I'm going to give you what my guest answer is, just to see how wrong I am. Because, people like
I'm not sure if you're wrong, but sure. Okay, let's try that.
I think I am. So let's see. So the question is, this all sounds great. This is a specific writer. This all sounds great, but I work at he names the company, but I'm not going to name the company. And I have an existing large-scale enterprise project. I'd like to bring event modeling in and event sourcing, but the project's already large, and I'm not the only developer on the team. So I guess it boils down to how would you get started on a brownfield project?
Yeah.
Right? Now, my guess answer is you would ideally try to start with one slice, right? Instead of trying to redo the whole project or inject it.
That's never going to work. Yeah, you're right.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, there's just with large enterprises, there's too much inertia. There's the code base is huge. The database schemas are huge. So there's definitely a way to have to strategically carve away pieces to understand them, and it's also really in those large systems, it's hard to find the seams within the implied components that make it up. So while people want to make the argument, how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time type of thing, just carve out what you can do. That carving is a very difficult exercise in a highly coupled old system. And so rightfully so, any change to how you work is met with skepticism and viewed as a risk. So there's ways to start on that. And one of the ways that I like to start, and I think the way I used to approach things in places where I consulted, and the goal was to have event sourcing, and even though we didn't call it event modeling, really an event sourced way of thinking about what's going on is to just use event modeling to document the part of the system you're you're doing. What it gives you is a right level of visually debugging, and debugging in a way that documents what the system's doing for yourself as a developer and for your boss and all the non-technical people that need to understand scope of the effort and how complex that part is. Because if, let's say, on your old brownfield project, you're tasked with fixing a bug. Well, I've been there, where you're spending weeks chasing down why the data is the way it is and why the system's not acting the way you want. It's, a really frustrating exercise to see what side effects of some other features are causing this. So basically retrofitting an event model onto a part of the system you're working on is really the best place to start. That's going to give you more information about where the potential seams are, to where you can start to make a replacement project. I've presented about this a lot of times. It's sometimes called the bubble pattern, or Martin Fowler calls it the strangler pattern. I think Eric Evans calls it the bubble pattern. Eric Evans is the author of the Domain-Driven Design book and the methodology behind it. So it really says to kind of have a sidecar of where the fixes and the new parts of the functionality are going to be, instead of replacing the whole thing, as the person asking the question has implied. That you definitely can't afford to replace the whole thing, but you do want to replace the parts that you can, or that have the highest sort of value, because they continue to have really expensive code churn. When all the bugs and all the fixes or enhancements that you do in a year end up being highly costly, and in that one area, then you want to first of all understand it. So just documenting it with event modeling, even if it's traditional, event modeling works for non-event systems. You conceptually have events, but you really just have materialized projections. The green boxes in event modeling really represent your queries, your select whatever from whatever tables joined together in this way. So you basically use the green boxes to show those joins, and the blue boxes to show your inserts, updates, and deletes. And you can now have a map of, okay, here's the workflow for doing this task. And you can show in slice format how the screens change and how you're inserting and updating. And that takes, again, the reason that these are inserts and updates in these traditional systems is that is the common ground. Like both developer and business person can, while the business person may not want to talk about SQL, they can agree that, hey, we stored this information, or hey, we projected this information on this screen at this point in time. And so now you have a common language, and this allows you to talk about the project of, like, I'm going to fix these bugs in this traditional system. I have the scope to, these workflows, and it affects X amount of slices, and we can actually start to talk sensibly about the effort involved, not just ask me for a t-shirt size, in a sprint planning meeting. It's really going back to, system design and intentional kind of planning, which I think we, dropped in Agile over the last couple of decades to allow these things to magically and miraculously emerge from the development effort, right? So Agile didn't address the siloing enough, I think. And so, event modeling brings the two worlds back together, getting rid of that tech, non-tech division, while of course you still have it, but at least how you're both talking about your individual goals on either side is now using this common language, where you now have way less loss in translation. Does that answer it?
I think that's a long answer. You can basically start with documentation and using it as a shared, right, a Rosetta Stone, if you will, for
exactly. Yeah, absolutely.
And that, in this specific case, that probably makes sense too, because he mentioned he is not the only developer on the project.
Yeah, Yeah, exactly.
Presumably, if you start with a new paradigm like a cowboy, you might annoy your teammates.
Yeah, there's the whole social aspect of that's a different topic of introducing any new methodology, whether it's event modeling or event sourcing, into a team, and that's a highly political discussion. For most places, there may be people with their own agendas. People might be threatened by new things for different reasons. You might be interrupting someone's long-term goal of whatever else they're trying to, implement. So with the larger the organization, the more of these types of issues are going to come up. And the only thing that's kind of your saving grace is to appeal to power and authority above you and make sure that, event modeling and event sourcing lines up with what your boss's boss and everyone else above that's, controlling the company is aligned with. And so, the good thing is that this is becoming a more common goal and an understood goal of the methodology at higher levels than before. This is a grassroots movement that as a developer wanted to work this way. So definitely there was a push from the people doing the work upwards to say, hey, we want to work this way. But I think, the benefits and the ease of communication have finally kind of reached the ears of directors and others, where now you want this level of collaboration as a company strategy, and event modeling and event sourcing both give you the optimal way to attain that. And the reason it works is that it's so in tune with how we think naturally. We as humans think in stories, and whenever let's say I ask you how your system works, the easiest thing you can do is, sit down beside me and say, okay, Adam, this is how it works. Watch how I log in and watch how I do this. And I'm like, oh, that's awesome, Michael. Thank you for explaining by example, of how the system works. And I can dive deeper into how come that showed up on the screen? You can explain it to me and just keep walking through that timeline back and forth. You can say, okay, watch again. I'm going to do this one more time. So this is by example, and humans are really, really good at that. That's how our brains kind of evolved as we developed tools and used fire and all sorts of stuff. Somehow we were able to pass this on to next generations. And so this, event modeling and event sourcing really has at its root how we would make systems even before computers. If we had trading companies that spanned the globe and at a great scale, and somehow we did this with pen and paper, and it was all record keeping, right? Any change, you had an audit of how it happened, and very similar to event sourcing, if not identical, just to, be able to explain anything, which are the way projections were implemented.
I heard the
back
Knights
then.
Templar invented event sourcing.
What's that?
I heard the Knights Templar invented event sourcing.
Event sourcing. I hate talking about event sourcing as a concept because it's something we've been doing forever. So I really don't emphasize it. It's really almost like the word event kind of throws in the technical jargon about like, oh, you're like event sourced and you're event based. So you're like publishing messages to a message bus, and drags in all of these technical things from technical architecture, which is not the point at all. The point is that, you're being very accounting like about the data in your system. You're really being careful to.
You're being it's basically GABA standards for coding, right? Generally accepted accounting standards for coding.
Yeah, exactly. It's like you don't want to change past records because you made a mistake, and then you got to realize that other people made decisions on that data, and by you editing it, you lost the trail there of reliability. So there's accounting standards are there for a reason, right? To fight fraud and mistakes and all sorts of things, right? So why don't we have the same in information systems? So that's why I believe it's the best default, and why we only develop systems this way, because you can always find out, why things happen, why things went the way they did.
Yeah. Makes a ton of sense to me. Well, Adam, thank you for the lesson. I'm sure people are going to have more questions. I'll
Oh, I
have
love
to.
it. Yeah. So I'm always happy to answer those. And yeah, if people find me online, they can ask me directly
I was
too.
just going to ask you, where can folks find you online to kind of, hook up with
Oh,
you, reach out?
yeah. One of the easiest places to talk about this stuff is our Discord server, which is you can join it on eventmodeling.org/resources.
Okay, I'll put that in the
And
link.
yeah, and that's I'm on there all the time, and as are other people. So there's lots of different tools being developed for automating, event modeling. Most people do event modeling in Miro because that's already established in a lot of enterprises. But as with a canvas, you're kind of free form, so you have to kind of guide people to make the slices the right way. And so there's a lot of tooling that people are making that'll guide you there. And so a lot of those creators are there. We have over 1,000 people in the Discord that are there discussing and contributing all the time. So yeah, it's the eventmodeling.ai by name is the Discord server if you want to search for it. And event modeling, the modeling is spelled with one L. Eventmodeling.org/resources will get you the link to join the Discord, and that's one way. I'm also on Twitter, or X as it's called. You can search for event modeling there. I'm also active on LinkedIn. There's a lot of, LinkedIn's now like the new Twitter, sort of. A lot of discussions now. It's become a lot less professional as here's my resume type of site to let's discuss and fight about stuff too. So, so that's another place. There's always posts there about, we talked about Agile and Scrum and things that are going wrong. And so, of course, there's some lively comments that I'm involved in on those things too on LinkedIn. So, I would say those are the kind of three top ones. The top one, of course, being the Discord channel where you're not going to get the noise from all the other topics. But then, in relation to how event modeling fits in with everything else, you're going to have that on X and on LinkedIn to kind of show the broad thing where some of the similar questions are kind of done. And when it's obvious that event modeling or event sourcing or both can help somewhere, I usually jump in with a comment to it, usually a highly viral post that's got thousands of likes and people are saying, yeah, scrums are great. I want to say that, you might consider some other approaches, or at least understand that there's other ways out of some of the problems being posted. So yeah. And of course, our adaptechgroup.com is my company, and you can see who's involved in the day-to-day, who the advisors are, and of course, I'm also backing some of these tools, and we'll be building more of them, more open source ones as well. So lots of and AI, of course, has helped this because AI is kind of a mirror now. You kind of had this lukewarm reception lately. We kind of have this Dunning-Kruger curve on AI, and say, well, there's a recent research. Sorry, one more subject before we go, because it's kind of interesting how event modeling affects the AI stuff. There's a research paper, I forget where it is, but they said that it was MIT or one of these big universities or something like that, where they said AI coding or vibe coding or AI is only helping 5%. It's actually detrimental to 95. Well, what about the 5? How are those guys making headwind of AI and being more productive? It's people that are doing responsible stuff, not just vibe coding. You're doing event modeling, event sourcing. AI is incredibly powerful when your scope and your context is limited to one of these slices. There's no hallucinations. It's just pure joy. So I think the answer to the really negative AI article, like 95% are less productive, why don't you find out how the 5% is making hay? And it's through things like this. Yeah. So I just wanted to leave it on that. I think it's that, people are accosted these days with using Cursor or other AI tools to their day-to-day coding jobs. And so event modeling can help you there tremendously, because you're going to have that reduced amount of scope where where now AI shines and actually helps you and gets out of your way.
And understand us.
And understands. Yeah, it's really important. And I think it shines a light on, like, we've been doing bad requirements for a long time, and all of a sudden we want
really make AI. It like the old system better and awesome wasn't a good requirement.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, no, I mean, and I think what's happened is that AI is just a mirror to this fact. And, but at least we have ways out, and like we have a responsible way of, and there's no problem with like developers helping develop the actual requirements in the first place. And I think that's kind of where the evolution in the age of AI, we're going to have a more well-rounded, developer role where they're involved in the specs and the requirements themselves. That's an important part of the job. And AI has shined a light that there's not enough work in that part, and why, project execution doesn't go as well. So, yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think we're going to a place where, I mean, this has always been true, right? Like you're saying, gathering requirements has always been kind of probably the most broken part, especially when you're doing contracting of the process.
Yeah.
But if you want to gain, and I'm actually working on a whole thing going through these different AI coding tools, but if you want to gain advantages from these tools, that's the number one problem you're going to have to fix. Whether you fix it through event modeling or some other method, one thing AI doesn't have is intuition, right?
Yeah. Or I think can't read your mind either.
Right. A lot of us have been like feeling our way through what does the client actually want, instead of, developing a proper process to actually know, which would be great.
Yeah, and it's fun. It's a collaborative approach that you actually sit down with the people you're going to be implementing the work for, and you get a way clearer, you get way more confidence and this courage we talk about in Agile. You get way more of that when you've finished talking for a couple of hours and creating the event model together. Both had input, and it becomes less personal, and people don't stop pointing fingers and arguing, because you're kind of shoulder to shoulder with the business and your colleagues and other colleagues looking at, this is the plan. And just like you roll out a blueprint on a construction site of a house, the plumber and carpenter then go away for the whole day to work on their parts without stepping on each other's toes. The carpenter's drilling, the holes in the walls that, will make sure the pipes can go through the house. And that's the kind of feeling we want when building software.
Exactly. Everything's spec'd out and everybody knows what they're doing.
Well, sometimes it's an evolutionary thing. Yeah, we kind of, in software, we know bits are cheap to flip. So we kind of get ahead of ourselves, and, we go forward with thinking that we're not building bridges and it's less expensive, but yet we're still eating up time. And that's still costing. So, yeah. Well,
all right, Adam. It's been great. Yeah, we're gonna follow up with this, and I know we're gonna get plenty of questions in the Discord.
I'm more than happy to come back anytime when your bucket of questions fills enough to do this again. And again, looking forward to meeting any new people that come in from this conversation. And thanks again for a lovely chat like last time.
All right. Great talking to you. Talk to you soon.
All right. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.